A human like us is obviously somewhat different from those kinds of creatures. Now, what I found is, if you look at archaeology as like a big museum, you would find that people are only let into one small room of that museum, and there they only see the discoveries that go along with the current dominant idea now in science, namely that human beings like us evolved from more primitive ape-like creatures fairly recently. Most scientists today would say that humans like us came into existence only between 100 and 200,000 years ago. And for all the millions and millions of years before that, there were no human beings like us. Now, that's the story you see when you go into the one small room of archaeology that the public's usually allowed into. But what I'm trying to point out in my book, Forbidden Archeology, is that there are other rooms in that big museum of archaeology, rooms with what I would call intellectual locks on the doors. And what I try to do in my work is take off those locks, open up the doors, and let people see what's really there. And what we find is many discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints going back tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years. But this evidence, it's not very well known because of what I call a process of knowledge filtration.
Right. That's my next question. But your research findings have led you to conclude that modern type of humans, Homo sapiens, are contemporaries and continuously existed alongside all these different ape-like creatures, or caveman, or however you want to explain it, Homo erectus or whatever. From whom the evolutionary biologists usually trace human descent or bifurcation, therefore confirming the Vedic sources that say that the human race has an endless antiquity. What do the Vedas exactly say regarding this?
Well, they say that humans were placed on this earth by higher powers, ultimately by God, for a specific purpose. That's something I get into in my most recent book, Human Devolution, a Vedic Alternative to Darwin's Theory, in which I propose, look, before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from? We should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? Because many scientists today are going to say that a human being or any other living thing is just a combination of the ordinary chemical elements. They'll say that's all you are. You are just a complex organization of chemicals. That's all there is to it. You're just matter, pure and simple, period. What I'm proposing, however, is that if we carefully look at all the evidence that comes to us from various fields of scientific investigation, we're going to see it's more logical to say that a human being is a combination of three things. Yes, ordinary matter, that is part of what a human being is, but beyond that, there is a subtle mind element associated with the human organism that can act in very unusual ways that contradict our current laws of physics. For example, this subtle mind element has powers like extrasensory perception, psychokinesis, mind over matter abilities, remote viewing abilities. It's a very strange mind that we have. And then beyond that, there is a conscious self that can exist completely beyond the body. So what I'm proposing is that consciousness or spirit is primary and matter is derivative. Modern science has it the other way around. They say matter is primary, and what we call consciousness, with all its feelings of love and all that stuff, that's just a temporary byproduct of biochemical electrical activity in the brain. And once you disorganize the chemicals, then there is no more consciousness or spirit or whatever you want to call it. It's just, it's secondary, it's derivative. I'm proposing it's the other way around. We begin as beings of pure consciousness, and instead of having our consciousness evolve up from matter, as most scientists now believe, it's rather the fact that we devolve down from that original condition of pure consciousness or spirit and become covered, by these lower energies of mind and matter.
So in other words, you're proposing that we did not evolve up from matter, rather we devolved from pure consciousness or spirit, and that process...
I call it devolution.
Devolution.
Yeah.
That's... do you call it a theory, or as opposed to the theory of evolution, or you just call it just a process?
Well, I call it an explanation. It's an
explanation.
Alternative explanation
Right.
for human origins. And I think it could also become a theory. I think you could also call it a theory, because what a good theory should allow you to do is to accommodate all the relevant evidence that's out there in such a way that you can put it together to answer some fundamental question that we have about the nature of life or the universe. For example, where did human beings come from? It's a very important question. So the Darwinists, they want to say, okay, well, here's the explanation. There were some chemicals existing in the Earth's early ocean, and they combined together, and they formed some first self-reproducing organism, and that single-celled organism, gradually became a multi-celled organism, something like a fish, and then the fish came onto the land and became amphibians and animals and monkeys, and finally the monkeys became ape men, and the ape men became human beings with consciousness, and they developed this idea of God somehow or other, but it's all just really chemicals combining together. If you really want to get down to it, that's what they would say.
Sure.
The explanation is. But what I pointed out is, first of all, there's a lot of fossil evidence that contradicts what they're saying. That was the topic of my first book, Forbidden Archeology, where I went through all of this archaeological evidence that just totally contradicts what they're telling us in the textbooks. When you go to the museum and you see these funny little displays of the little monkey that gets bigger and bigger and finally turns into a human being, or you turn on television to all these science programs where they're constantly drumming this idea into your head, or when you go to school, you get brainwashed into this because that's all that the government allows to be presented. The evolutionists, they have a monopoly in the education system, a government-enforced monopoly in the education system. It's a very strange thing to be going on in a democratic country like the United States of America, where you have the government saying only one idea can be taught. It's very strange. I think we have to think about that. But what I'm saying is, first of all, you got a lot of fossil evidence that contradicts that idea. For
Right.
example, the California gold mine discovery is a very interesting case that's always fascinated me. During the gold rush days, these miners, they were going to California, and they were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains in the Sierra Nevada mountains, at places like Table Mountain in the Sierra Nevada mountains near the city of Sonora in Tuolumne County. So deep inside these tunnels, in the solid rock, the miners were finding human bones, human skeletons, just like ours, not like any kind of ape man. And they were also finding all kinds of stone tools and weapons, obsidian spear points, all kinds of things like that. And they were finding them in layers of solid rock that modern geologists say are about 50 million years old. So, all these discoveries, they were reported to the scientific world by Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. Now, Whitney is named after him. So his report about these very ancient human artifacts and bones was published by Harvard University. But we don't hear very much about these discoveries today because of that process of knowledge filtration that I was talking about. There was one scientist named Dr.